Welcome to the book of Proverbs, a book which is simultaneously strange and perfectly normal. It's normal because it addresses the stuff of everyday life, raising a family, how we use our words and our money, hard work. Take a look at this proverb from chapter 12. Whoever works hard will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. It's so practical. But the book of Proverbs is strange because it addresses the stuff of everyday life and not what we're used to in the whole Hebrew Bible. I mean, there's nothing in the book of Proverbs about the king, the nation of Israel, priests, temples, sacrifices, the land, the exile, the covenant, the laws. All of that is absent from the book of Proverbs. It is as if when we have stepped into the book of Proverbs, we've stepped out of the whole stream of the Hebrew Bible. Why is that? Well, we have to remember where the book of Proverbs is located in the Hebrew Bible. Now, do you remember what Jews called their Old Testament? The Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Let's remind ourselves of that structure by looking at a little chart. So here is the Tanakh, formed of three different sections, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Nevi'im, which is the former prophets and the latter prophets, and then that strange and random collection of books called the Ketuvim, the writings. That, of course, is where the book of Proverbs is located. And we've made the argument before that all of the books within the Ketuvim are oriented towards issues raised by the exile. Is God, has he given up on the covenant? What do we do now? And that second question, what do we do now, is what the book of Proverbs is primarily concerned with. How do we live when we're outside of the land? When we're not living underneath a Davidic king and we can't go to the temple regularly and offer our sacrifices? What does a God-honoring life look like when we're living in Babylon, in Persia, in Manila, Kathmandu, Ho Chi Minh? Now, however, though the content of the book of Proverbs steps out of the stream of the whole Hebrew Bible, the opening line of every book within the Ketuvim points back to somewhere within the stream of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah and the Nevi'im. So let's go back to the beginning of Proverbs 1 and look at that hyperlink. Back to the Nevi'im. Okay, Proverbs chapter 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Now, Solomon, he was a pretty smart dude, wasn't he? It says that he loved Yahweh, and that Yahweh, therefore, said, ask for whatever you want, and I will do it for you. And what did he ask for? Don't you remember? Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 3. And Solomon's going to say, I'm but a child. I'm foolish. Therefore, give your servant, it's an important title, understanding. Give me an understanding mind that I may govern your people and discern between good and evil. That reminds me of the Garden of Eden, by the way. And of course, God answered that prayer in spades. God says, I will give you a wise and discerning mind so that none will be like you who has been before, nor anyone who will rise after you to compare with you and your wisdom. Let's go down to chapter 4. This amazing things are said about Solomon and his wisdom here. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure. The breadth of his mind was like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed all the people of the East. Think about Job. And all the wisdom of Egypt even. He was wiser than all other men. Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, all these other really smart guys. Look at this. He spoke 3,000 proverbs. Oh, interesting. And his songs were 1,005. Think about Song of Songs. And he spoke about trees and all these other things. 3,000 proverbs. Well, fancy that. It seems as if what we have here in the book of Proverbs is just a small sampling of the wisdom and the proverbs of Solomon. But the thing is, it's not just the wisdom and the proverbs of Solomon. There are some other guys involved in this project we call Proverbs as well. Now, Solomon, his content, the Proverbs of Solomon, are located in chapters 10 through 22 and 25 to 29. Those are specifically the Proverbs of Solomon. Let's take a look at 10:1, and you'll see what I mean. Jump back to the book of Proverbs here. Proverbs 10, the Proverbs of Solomon. And it's going to go down all the way to the middle of chapter 22. And then we pick up in chapter 25, and Solomon's back again. These are also the Proverbs of Solomon. But take a look at this. Which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It appears as if Proverbs did not take its final shape within the reign of Solomon, but quite a bit of time after Solomon. And Proverbs as well, we can see, is a collection of collections of Proverbs, groups of Proverbs all brought together into this one book. I mean, we got Solomon here, but then we also have the sayings of the wise. Here, starting in the middle of chapter 22. Let's look at that. The second collection within the book of Proverbs. So we have Proverbs of Solomon, chapter 10. You go down to chapter 22, and Proverbs of Solomon, you press the pause button on them for a minute, and we get the words of the wise. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. And these words of the wise are going to continue through the middle of chapter 24, and then there's another grouping. These are also the sayings of the wise, a second collection. And then on top of that, we have more wisdom by a guy named Augur in chapter 30 and another guy named Lemuel in the final chapter, chapter 31. And what's neat as well is it appears as if there's some kind of sophistication with the way in which these hundreds of proverbs are arranged within the book of Proverbs, specifically chapters 10 to 29. So the first group of Solomonic proverbs are in chapter 10 to the first half of 22. Now, there are exactly 375 proverbs within these chapters, 12 chapters or so. And the numerical value of the name Solomon is 375. This is how you spell his name in Hebrew. Sin, Lamed, Mem, He. And each of these letters has a numerical value in Hebrew. You add it all up, 375 proverbs in the first group of Solomon. I mean, that's amazing. Mind blown, right? Well, look now at the sayings of the wise. Let's return to where they begin in the middle of chapter 22. What does it say? Let's jump back to 22:17. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to knowledge, that your trust may be in the Lord. I have made known to you today, even to you, have I not written 30 sayings of counsel and knowledge? 30 sayings. Well, guess what? Surprise, surprise. In this opening section of the sayings of the wise, there are exactly 30 proverbs. There's definitely someone who is arranging these things with intentionality, isn't there? And then within each of these groups, each of these sections, it appears as if the proverbs are grouped not so much by theme or by subject, but by form. So in the first section of Solomon Proverbs, these 375, they're all very uniform. Every single one of these 375 proverbs is just 2 lines, a single verse, very uniform. And we can possibly determine a break or a division somewhere here in the middle of chapter 15, where the first half of these proverbs are mostly antithetical in nature. That is, they present opposites or contrasts. The righteous goes forward, but the wicked, he always turns to the left or to the right. You know, they're opposites, they're contrasts. But then the second half of these 375 proverbs, they are mostly, though not all, synthetic. So it's they'll say something and then they'll continue. They'll build upon that first line. Let me show you what I mean. So let's jump somewhere in the middle of the first half. Let's go to chapter 13 and we'll look for antithetical proverbs. So these proverbs are grouped by form. So here we are in the middle of the first section of the Proverbs of Solomon. Look for opposites. A wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to a rebuke. They're opposites. From the fruit of his mouth a man eats what is good, but the desire of the treacherous is for violence. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. See, these are opposites. Now let's jump to the second half of the first group of Solomon Proverbs and look for synthetic Proverbs. Let's go to, say, chapter 18. Look for things that build one line to the next. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all judgment. See how it's building? One thought continues to the next and doesn't have a contrast or an opposite expression. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his own opinion. When wickedness comes, contempt comes also, and with dishonor comes disgrace. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook. So that's interesting. And if we jump now to the sayings of the wise, these 30 proverbs are no longer uniform, right? All of these 375, they're 2 lines each, just one verse, standalone proverbs, you may say. But here, they're not uniform. Some of the proverbs are just a couplet, 2 lines. Some of them are 5 lines, or I guess 10 individual lines. That they're longer, so they're not of uniform length. And the same is true with this first half of the second group of Solomon Proverbs, 25 to 27. And these are really fun because they're just filled with evocative imagery, which is just so fun. These are some of my favorite Proverbs. One of them says something like, "He who grabs hold of a dog's ear is like the person who interferes in the quarrel of his neighbors." Isn't that great? That's wonderful. Let's see, what else do we want to say here? All right, so while there appears to be some kind of logic with the way in which these proverbs are arranged, the general rule, you guys, is that for interpretation, context is irrelevant. It's probably the only time you're going to hear me say that. Context is irrelevant. What you're supposed to do with every one of these proverbs is take them one at a time and chew on them and meditate on them and learn from them, and then move on to the next one, and it's going to discuss a completely different subject. All right, so why then did someone go through so much effort to collect all of these proverbs and then arrange them in these really pretty groups for us? What is the point? Well, fortunately, the compiler of the Proverbs states his purpose for us directly at the very beginning of the book. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if all books of the Bible did that? Thank you so much, author of the Proverbs. Let's look at that purpose here in chapter 1. What's the book of Proverbs for? Well, these Proverbs are, and there's a whole bunch of incomplete sentences, right? To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to get prudence, to give prudence to the simple, and knowledge and discretion to the youth, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So that's the purpose of Proverbs. They're intended to produce these things within us, to produce wisdom within those who read the book of Proverbs. Now let's pause for a minute and talk about this word wisdom. In the Hebrew, it is chokmah. You want to say that with me? Chokmah, wisdom. Now, we require a little bit of translation in understanding this word chokmah, because the English translation, wisdom, it doesn't capture the full meaning of this word in Hebrew. You see, in English, the word wisdom, it's kind of something that happens exclusively in our heads, isn't it? It's someone who is really smart, who has a high IQ. He is wise. But in the Hebrew, chokmah, it extends beyond simply what we think to what we do. So therefore, the first person in the Bible, and the Hebrew Bible, who is called or said to possess chokmah is not a philosopher. Who is it? It is a craftsman, a guy named Bezalel, the guy who built the tabernacle in the wilderness under Moses. You remember that? Bezalel? Let's look at that moment where he's described as having chokmah. It's in Exodus 31. This is going to help us understand what is wisdom, and therefore what is the purpose of the book of Proverbs. Exodus 31. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called Bezalel by name, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God." Bezalel is the second person in the Bible who is said to have been filled with the Spirit. The first person is Joseph. All very interesting. I have filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship. See this word ability? In the Hebrew, chokmah. I have filled him with wisdom, with chokmah, intelligence, with all knowledge and craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, bronze, and cutting stones for setting, and carving wood, and to work in every craft. So, Bezalel, he was wise. He had chokmah because he had a knowledge of the raw materials. He had a knowledge of the raw materials of his craft, and he had skill. He had ability to apply that knowledge and produce beauty and goodness. So that's what chokmah is all about. Wisdom, or chokmah, is an applied knowledge. It is, I like this definition, it is skill in the art of living well. It's a knowledge of the raw materials of life. What are some of those raw materials? People, relationships, our emotions and attitudes, our words, the things that we say. And then it's a skill to apply and to direct all of those raw materials in order to produce beauty and life and blessing and goodness. That is what chokmah is. But the thing is, it is not just about health and wealth. Though the book of Proverbs does have a lot to say about how our decisions can result in success. No, all wisdom, all chokmah has as its starting place, the beginning of chokmah is the fear of the Lord. That's the last verse here in this critical preamble. Let's look at it briefly. Back to Proverbs. To know wisdom and instruction, for the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, this is a tricky expression, isn't it? The fear of the Lord. We kind of get caught up in this thought, am I supposed to be afraid of God? And then we're quick to respond, oh, no, it's not that kind of fear. And then we redefine fear as like awe or reverence or respect. And I think that's right, that's correct. The wise person is not afraid that God is going to smite us, that he's going to smash us. But we are aware, when we fear the Lord, we're aware that God is the one to make the rules, and God is the one to set the consequences. That is his prerogative as the creator. And that when I live by the fear of the Lord, I recognize my place in the universe that he made, and I submit to the moral laws that God has woven into creation. This is a needle and thread. When I live by the fear of the Lord, I submit to the moral laws that God has woven in to creation. You see, that is what the bulk of the book of Proverbs is all about. They are observations of the moral laws that God has built into creation. They are observations about life. In the same way that a scientist will observe the laws of gravity, say, and then he'll seek to define and to codify how those laws of gravity work. That's what the book of Proverbs is. That they're short, memorable observations on how life normally works and how God has designed it to work. Let's look at some examples of how God has designed life to work. We've already seen some. Let's look at some more. Let's jump now to chapter 11. How has God designed life to work? A man who is kind benefits himself, but a cruel man hurts himself. That is the moral law that God has baked into creation. When you're nice, people are going to be nice to you, and life is going to go well for you. But if you're a jerk, then life is going to be challenging for you. Let's see what else. The soul of a sluggard craves Someone who's lazy, that they want, but they don't get anything. But the soul of someone who is diligent and works hard, they are richly supplied. We all know that's true. And that is a principle that God has woven into creation. What else? The righteousness of the blameless keeps his way straight, but the wicked falls by his own wickedness. The righteous is delivered from trouble, but the wicked falls into it instead. God has woven and he has wired the universe according to a certain set of rules or patterns of cause and effect relationships, which are all set in place by chokmah, by wisdom. Wisdom is the fabric. See this thread? Wisdom is the fabric which is woven in to everything that is. In Proverbs 8, it says that wisdom was with God at the creation. When he made all things, he did so according to wisdom. Wisdom then is the blueprint according to which God has architected the cosmos. It is the grain of wood along which life grows properly and in its right order. It's the grain of the wood. And we, as his creatures, we can tap into that wisdom. We can tap into chokmah, the chokmah that was with God at the beginning of creation. When we live with the grain of chokmah, then life will go well for us. It'll lead to success and honor. But when we try to go against the grain, when we follow the way of folly, then that will lead to difficulty and to struggle, to ruin and to shame. We have the way of wisdom and the way of folly. And we're going to be introduced to Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly in chapters 1 through 9 next.